Good evening. On behalf of the Hyderabad Literary Festival, all my colleagues and I, we welcome you to this monthly online session. This interesting session features women scientists. But before I go on to that, I have a couple of announcements to make. One is that if you're first time visiting our site, please click the subscribe button and the like button so that you will be updated on our very exciting monthly talks that we have been conducting without stopping from the COVID times. That is, since 2020, we have been regularly having these monthly sessions. Our annual festival is a 3-day physical event spanning a lot of events with streams from literature, culture, arts, exhibitions, workshops, etc. And every year it is held in January. So this year's, the 2024 dates are January 26th to 28th. We hope that all of you would mark these dates in your calendar and come and visit us and participate in this festival, which is a people's festival, and it is open and free to everyone. This session, before one more announcement, I'm sorry. Next week, Saturday, 23rd at 6 p.m., we are screening a film in association with the Goethe Zentrum and the Annapurna College for Film and Media at the Shiva Theatre in Annapurna Studios. This is a film which is where you will meet the filmmaker, Vishal Nityanand. This is a film called Life Flows On, and it is dedicated to the global dementia and Alzheimer's issues. And it's a very sensitive and a beautiful film, starring among many other stalwarts, Tom Alter, the late Tom Alter. It is a film that is very sensitively made, and this is open again to everyone, free of charge. Please do mark your calendar and do come for this session. Coming to this session, on one hand, we have the first female head of the CSR labs, and then the Director General. And then we have the high visibility of ISRO scientists in space. And yet, for every one of these women, there are hundreds of women who are invisible. Many struggle a lot to make it. So STEM is something that a lot of people talk about, but really women in science still remains a big issue. So our young authors today, Aashima Dogra and Nandita Raj, have painstakingly gone to different labs, talked to many women, and culled out these stories to write this book, Lab Hopping, A Journey to Find India's Women in Science. This is published in 2023 by Penguin. It's a collection of inspiring stories of women scientists in India who have persevered in their scientific pursuits despite facing numerous challenges, from stereotypes and sexism to systematic and organizational obstacles. These stories shed light on both a flawed system and the remarkable efforts of extraordinary women striving to reform it. The authors raise critical questions about India's support to its women in science and whether Western models of science and feminism can effectively be applied in the Indian context. The book not only offers a comprehensive examination of the status of women in science, but also presents a roadmap for the future, outlining potential solutions to bridge the gender gap in the field. I would now like to introduce the authors of this book. Aashima Dogra is a seasoned independent science communicator with over 13 years of experience. She is a science journalist, writer, and editor, having worked in both Indian and international media. In 2016, she co-founded the lifeofscience.com, TLOS. She co-founded a feminist science media project that features investigative reporting, literary contributions, and discussions on social issues in Indian science. Her diverse work includes science comics for children, popular science books like 31 Fantastic Adventures in Science 2019 and Fly in Space 2019, science podcasts, and occasional lectures on inclusive science communication to graduate students. She joins us today on this session from Austria. Her colleague Nandita Jairaj, who is the co-author, is doing several online on-the-ground activities and is away at a conference right now, and therefore is not joining us today, has been writing, editing, and creating various kinds of science media that have appeared in publications such as The Hindu, Scroll.in, The Wire.in, and the Mongabe India. Along with Aashima Dogra, she co-founded the feminist science media platform, thelifeofscience.com. She is also an author or co-author of books such as Ratna and the Ring of Fire 2021, 31 Fantastic Adventures in Science 2019, and Anna's Extraordinary Adventures with Weather 2018. Talking to them is Somdatta Karak, who is collaborating with us not only as an interlocutor here, but as one of the founder members of Sci City Hyderabad, which is collaborating with us in this particular session. In fact, this is their inaugural session with HLF. She is trained as a life scientist and works as a science communicator. She has a doctorate in neuroscience from the University of Göttingen and has been a Teach for India Fellow. She now leads science communication and public outreach at the CSIR lab, Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology. She is passionate about making science and technology understandable and accessible to the young people of India, and she engages with various forms of mediums to be able to do so. She also co-leads the Superheroes Against Superbugs, an educational and public engagement initiative on antimicrobial resistance in India. Over to you, Somdatta, for this interesting discussion on women scientists in India, lab hopping, and we are happy to be collaborating with Sci City Hyderabad. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much, Kinera, for that very, very kind introduction. So, hi, Aashima. So, I work as a science communicator, and in my work as a science communicator, a lot of my work focuses on seeing public's perception of science and scientists. And often, if I ask people to name women scientists, Marie Curie is the only name that comes up. And maybe the one contribution that COVID-19 has given to Indians is that now people also come up with names like Gagandeep Khan. But the number of names, I mean, I don't think really crosses 4 to 5. And most of them are because, I mean, the names that people know from India are because these women scientists that they know of are the ones who have played some seminal role in healthcare. But beyond that, and now because of Chandrayaan, people have seen, as the media says, the bindi clad and the sari clad women of ISRO. But if you really ask them the names of these people or what do they really do, and the understanding is negligibly low, if at all. So I understand from your book as well that you and Nandita went about looking for these women in science in India. So maybe let's start with understanding what led you to this journey and what you found out from there. So yeah, Aashima, why did you go about hopping labs across India?
Thanks for your question, Somdatta. Just before answering that, I want to say hello and hey to everyone listening in. Thanks to Kinera and also Lasya in the background for putting this together. Yeah, I'm here to talk about a book that I co-authored that has been briefly introduced just now. And like Somdatta has prodded, it's really come to fruition after a journey was undertaken, a journey which began in 2016. And as science journalists, as science writers and editors working in this time for, in fact, a children's science magazine, me and Nandita grew slightly impatient and frustrated that we ourselves did not know many Indian women scientists that were prominent in the discussions. And we were also kind of frustrated with the view of a scientist that is still quite dominant, which is of an old white man, maybe an old Brahmin man with big hair, shaking test tubes, and specifically to India, a learned fellow. And it did not fit our view, and we kind of wanted to close that. And we went after to find these stories that would close this gap ourselves, and we went across the country, hopping through labs, literally hopping through labs, up and down the country, to look for women scientists that were contemporary to our time, that were going after scientific questions of all varieties, and of course, in different disciplines, but also in different kinds of institutions where science takes place in our country. So these are institutions, the INIs, institutions of national importance, as they're called, which includes the IITs, the ISERs. We also went to state and central universities. And what began to emerge from these stories that we were collecting, these women that we were meeting and writing about, firstly their science and then their experiences of being a minority in science, was that there were some issues that were becoming very prominent. They were common between many women that we were meeting. So we've interviewed through the project, not just us, then the project kind of grew and included other people, and we transformed into feminist science media project. And we also started to look at different intersectionalities. So we've interviewed around and edited stories of around over 500, between 500 to 800, I would say, stories of marginalized people in science. And from this big number, we could clearly tell what are the gaps that we need to work on if we are to be an inclusive science community, because at present and also in the past, we haven't been one. And so this is what we found, the reasons behind the gender gap, the inequities that are present in the Indian science community. Yeah.
So let's talk about the gender gap then. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what does that gap look like? How big is that gap? Where do we find women, or where do we glaringly not find women in science in India?
Yeah, so there is a chapter in our book. The book we're talking about is right here. I can just pull it out. This is the book. It seems, oh no, the blur is kind of taking the color away. Yeah, it's hardcover, so it looks bigger than it is. But the question that you asked is kind of addressed in the first part of the book, which tries to describe the gender gap. And one of the chapters takes on, you're also from the science community, I know, so we're always asked about the numbers, give us the data, and that's exactly what we did. And you can get at this number from various angles.
Yeah.
The big number, of course, the most important number that everybody's asking for is 14%. So 14% of India's scientists are women, which is quite low. And if you look at different countries, we are quite low at the equity level. So we do much worse than most countries where gender parity is concerned in STEM. Of course, these 14% women also have various identities, other identities, besides just being women. And this is where the problem really warrants a book and a lot more analysis, because these issues are, it's not a single issue, it's various issues, and it's, yeah, there are various axes of marginalization that are at work here. But most of the Indian women scientists that we have today in our labs are at the bottom rung. So when I say bottom rung, it means they are at the student level. As you go up, as we write in the book, the gender gap resembles a pyramid. So the chunk of the women are at the student level, at graduate level, then postdoc. As you go up the scientific ladder, which is professorship, lectureship, full professor, and then, of course, management levels and director level stuff, the numbers very steadily go down of women. Also, you can see this pyramid in a different way. The more it's funny because, all the institutions now want to be seen as diverse, inclusive spaces. And of course, the ones that have most power and prominence must lead the way. But more the profile of the institution, less the women numbers you see there. So it's the central universities and the state universities that have more women. The more prestige or formally importance the institution has, the gender gap we see worsening in these institutions. So we can see it if you adopt a feminist lens, you can see that where there is more power and resources, there is less and less women. Of course, caste is a big reality of our country, and most of the women that we have interviewed and most of the women scientists in India come from the upper castes, so-called upper castes, and also most of them are cisgendered.
So we understand that there are 14% women in India. Women in STEM. 14% of people in STEM in India happen to be women, and they're cisgendered, and they come from upper castes. And and you said that most of them are in universities. So what kind of, do we see disparity or differences in the kind of work that most men scientists do in India versus the women scientists do in India, given that we see a difference in the spaces they occupy, that more women scientists are in university levels and the men scientists, as a corollary, then I'm saying, are in the research institute spaces?
Yeah, for sure. That's a very keen observation you made, because as one of the chapters in our book is titled, most of the women scientists that we met, and the numbers also say, are teacher scientists. So that's the difference there. Of course, there are also teacher scientists who are men in our country, but if you are doing a comparison, there are more teacher scientists who are women. And of course, like already discussed, where top-notch, heavily funded research is happening in institutes that the public is funding, most of these scientists, lab leaders, are cis men. So that could be the difference, but I wouldn't really draw a line at, the kind of work that they're doing, because we have women physicists, we have women theoretical physicists, we have women experimental physicists, condensed matter physicists. I'm just talking about physics, but of course this extends to all streams of science. So we do find women in every discipline, but the access to opportunities, to labs, to resources, to funding is quite skewed.
Right. And that kind of connects to what also happened probably last week when the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Awards got announced, and among the 9 awardees, none of them happened to be women. So is that simply a reflection of women occupying spaces that do not have enough resources and opportunities and hence do not find a way into these awards, or there's more to it?
No, I think there's more to it. The Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize, like you said, this time did not find any worthy women scientists to award. And this is not the first time. Last year was the same. Very concerning reality that they found no women scientists. Only in 2018 have the SSB, which is the biggest Indian science award. For the first time a woman physicist was awarded was in 2018 when Aditi Sende got the award. And I don't think there is a rhetoric that says, oh, there aren't enough women and this is why, what can you expect? But really, it's not like this, because from our project, and also if you are part of the science community, you know at least one woman in every field that is at the edge of physics, at the edge of biology, at the edge of engineering, that is doing good work. So basically, with that argument, what you're implying, if somebody says us, what they're implying is that the women that, even though they are few, those women are not doing good work, which is absolutely not true. In fact, some women scientists who we have interviewed, who would be worthy of these awards, and many have pointed this out, have told us that they've kind of observed that they get recognition more abroad than at home. So they get a lot of international awards, and they're recognized in the international science community with proper recognitions and honors, but this is sadly not the case. I think the reason is because of the SSB procedure, that it is biased. The selection procedure is biased, firstly, and there is not more we can say to it because we do not know more about it. It is completely opaque process. The nominee, the jury is completely unknown. CSR, in fact, keeps it a secret. And this word secret has been used quite a bit by our sources when we try to investigate the SSB process. Now there has been news that there is the whole award section of our country, the administration of all awards in the country is going through a revamp, but this conversation has been going on for about 2 years now, and we don't know what the fate will be. But hopefully, at least the Nobel Prizes, and we also have a privately funded science award in India, which is the Infosys Science Prize, which at least makes an effort. There's at least one woman consistently. It's already kind of like, a defeated argument, because like we're not talking about one woman,
Right.
at least one. So it's not so hard. It's not, in fact, hard at all, because as our project has shown, as our conversation have shown, there is a lot of amazing work that women scientists are doing in the country, but they are being sidelined. And there is an old boys club that kind of runs Indian science, and it's quite a complex problem that needs a lot of work.
Yeah. So talking of awards, and often in the conversations in my circles, when the awards come up and the questions are who gets nominated, then there is this very subjective term called as excellence. And I'm sure you must have also come across those conversations yourself. And would you want to go through what exactly are the metrics of excellence in science that India has? Does it differ in other parts of the world, or are we seeing the same trend across? I, in my personal opinion, really think that Indian science is hugely influenced by the structures that UK, for example, has.
Yeah.
So are we seeing trends that are globally the same, or there are differences? Because I also remember that you said that our Indian women scientists who do not find as much appreciation in India find appreciation in other parts of the world. So clearly there is some difference, but how have you perceived it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting and very important question, because you cannot talk just about Indian science, even though we have tried to do that in our book. But it's really hard to do so, because science is no longer Indian science and UK science and European science. It's very interconnected, as you know. We are in the age of modern science, as we call it, and no science is done by one lab. It's always a collaboration. Papers have like more and more number of authors in them. So, of course, the problems of bias, specifically bias against women scientists, we have borrowed from the history of modern science, which is global, which is not just Indian. Of course, we also have our own set of issues about knowledge making, which have a lot to do with caste, etc., which on the home front. But of course, it is a global issue. It is not a secret that, when we think of scientists, everybody around the world thinks of Einstein. That's the first thing you clock to. And this is because of the same thing, that we are thinking about science itself. What we're defining as science is coming from this one idea, which is not an inclusive idea. And hence, those problems, as you can imagine, that the construction of science, wherever it happens, has been borrowed or used, like co-used. And it's hard to break out of that. But I think in the global media as well as Indian media, we have realized that we're doing something wrong. Science is not inclusive, in fact, but it should be. And people have started working towards it. So this women in science discourse has been going on for a number of years now. It wasn't such a big deal when we started the Life of Science project, but during its course, it became slowly, became bigger. And I work in Austria currently, and I'm also part of an institute here. And, I know that the discourse is here, but there is also a lot of action by authorities. There is a lot of accountability, the kind of defensiveness, backlash. You also see backlash here, but it's kind of more cloaked. Whereas in India, we seem to still say things like, women can't do math, or who does the computing in your lab if you only have women students. So you see a lot of, also in our book, we've covered this like invisible bias and, this everyday bias, explicit and implicit biases. So there are both things, but definitely the global issue and the Indian issue are connected. But what I don't see in India yet is things like the SSB. The Nobel Prizes and also the Royal Society have done many crimes against invisibilizing women's knowledge and stuff in the past, but they have at least now in the recent years corrected themselves. You see, if you do the statistics, you see in the last 5 years, the number of Royal Society fellows who are women has shot up. Before there were none. But in India, you still see a very slow rise. You see tokenism, and when big positions are given to women, and as we can see, the SSB seems to be going nowhere. We're still at 0 out of 23 women.
Sure. So, it's also probably is a reflection of, the Indian science is still kind of coming of age, and I would like to believe that it's work in progress. But of course, these are all very, very important metrics for us to keep in mind, and also understand how everybody else is dealing with kind of correcting the past, because a lot of people get defensive about it as well. Like, what all things do we need to do that will correct the past? And also, whatever, even if they're picking a woman scientist, and this is another conversation that I see, that when a woman scientist gets awarded, and a lot of questions are targeted to them as a woman scientist and not a scientist, and a lot of women scientists do take offense to it. And of course, they are also understanding why these questions are important. But at the same time, because these questions are there, oftentimes the perception does become like, oh, maybe it is only an act of tokenism, only an act of just filling up the diversity tick box. So, and I'm also extremely sure that you have had those conversations with the scientists, especially the women that you have spoken of. So how do you think they are taking it ahead? What do they think about the corrections that the community needs to take? Aashima, you're on mute.
Sorry.
No.
I was just saying that it's quite difficult because, like you said, we have in fact met women scientists who said, no, I don't want to answer any woman science question because I'm a scientist and I, don't want to do, say, the extra labor. So once you are the only woman in the boardroom, all the inclusivity work you have to do, which is quite lopsided, right? So, and also it's condescending to be given an award just because of your gender identity. And at the same time, we need that change to come. So there will be more, if we are hoping to reach some kind of gender inclusivity, there will be the first transgender SSB award winner, hopefully. There will be the first tribal IIT biological sciences head. And so I think these are things to be taken in one stride. But it is true that many women scientists do take offense at being referred to as women scientists but I think this is also a systemic problem because the system kind of punishes you when you assert your identity. So this is also in the context of what the science culture allows. There is a policing going on there. That only talk about your science, don't talk about the issues. We are here just for the data, They say in science, show me the baby, not the labor pains, stuff like this.
Right.
So it's not a very inclusive culture. And I think if you are to survive in such a culture, that punishes discourse, and many scientists, top scientists, have told us that you cannot be take up the flag and be that assertive because you get punished for it. You get we have a chapter in the book called the F word, the feminist word. A lot of the issues are hush hush, but this is by design because talking about issues has been not is not welcome because the status quo kind of doesn't benefit it. But there are women who are doing it. And of course, there are also allies, men who are in the science community who understand the issue, who don't do it out of the goodness of their heart, but see that this is a systemic problem. Science is suffering, the community is suffering, and that it isn't fair to have this kind of biases. And so I would say, but you have to reach a position to be able to voice these concerns. If you are not in the position, the system will kind of punish you. And then it makes a lot of sense to not go there in order to protect your position.
Right. So, and given that our conversation is also a lot about women moving from the lower rungs to the higher rungs of academia and also becoming more visible, maybe we should also talk about why is it important for women to reach the higher rungs? I mean, is it only because women who are half of the population should also be occupying those positions? Like you and me as women have complete rights to think of it from that angle. But, or is there more to it? Like, does the society as a whole benefit by having more diversity in people who occupy the top rung positions?
Yeah. Many answers to this. There are a lot of good reasons to get rid of the biases and have more diversity. Firstly, why not? Which begs to say, why must science just be run by one kind of demographic? And if it does, then we get to the second bit that we will get science wrong. Science is a self-correcting system that thrives on critical thinking, that thrives on the diversity of ideas, that thrives in the diversity of views and data. So anybody who is from science, who likes science for what it really is, understands that it desperately needs diversity. And if you don't have that diversity, at all level of data, of people, of ideas, of conferences, of collaborations, then you get a very myopic view that will not serve your findings. You will not get the whole picture. That's what is the main crux of it. So science definitely benefits science. Diversity definitely benefits science, and women in science is part of that. And science benefits society, right? I mean, there is a lot of also science and humanities work in India and elsewhere. But there's also some critique about the kind of questions that we're asking. And if you think about it kind of like deeply, you can also see, I mean, if there are different kinds of identities and backgrounds working in research and in technology, we would see a different kind of world, right? If only one kind of people is doing all the technological advancement, then maybe we will have more wars and more resource extractive ways in which nations and companies govern, right? Maybe we don't need that many tech dude boys, like we don't need that many Elon Musks, but more Jane Goodalls. And I mean, I'm not trying to say there is a feminine way to do science and a masculine way to do science, but what I'm saying is that everybody's ideas will be kind of addressed by science if everybody is welcome into science. Another good reason to take care of the gap is that it's not fair for our incoming daughters and nephews and nieces and sons. I mean, this is all family, but the next generation.
Yeah.
Of course, patriarchy, which is what the result of it is what we're seeing. It not only like oppresses women and non-binary and trans people, but also the apparent benefactors who are men and boys. I mean, that is a different talk, but I think it's good for the next generation to have an equitable space. It's also like if you compare it to a democracy, if you have less inequality in your population, then you can administer much well. Even the richer person lives a better life if the poorest person is not as poor as you can imagine, right? Another reason, I would say the last of it, what I'm thinking of is, and we write this in the book, that if we don't look at it now, it can worsen. These things are, these are human constructs, human arrangements that can get a life of their own. So if we don't check these biases, they keep on getting reinforced, and then it can get worse, and we will end up in a system so we need to be standing up for diversity in science, I believe.
So I'm talking of biases. Maybe we also take our audience through what are the common biases that you have seen against women in STEM? Like, why do people still believe that women cannot do science and technology or math? Like, why is it so?
I can feel this, like, why? Kind of like, I'm also lost at this, like, why is this still continuing?
Yeah.
But like I said, these things have a life of their own, and we have been kind of reinforcing it and you don't realize when these things get reinforced, right? Like when we did in this Women in Science discourse, it's quite interesting and common to do this draw a scientist activity.
Yeah.
A lot of psychomoms have done that, where you meet with a classroom, like young kids, and you say, okay, now you draw a scientist. And if a child which is 10 years old is drawing a man scientist, that already says that this is social programming. So yeah, there is social programming, which is hard to shake off, but this is not it. I think because I have written this book and I have investigated and researched, I know that there is also vested interests of people who are in power to kind of stay in power because it serves them. It is not beneficial for them to redistribute, the opportunities and there is no good reason behind it. Like we have a lot of convincing to do. We have a lot of dialoguing to do, and I'm sure it will come to it. But also, it is the way we also think about science and, by extension, nature. Right. There's also a part in the book where we talk to a historian of science who's talking about how there is no woman in the history of science in India or elsewhere, but they are always the devis, the goddesses, the Urania, the goddess of astronomy. So there is, as the scholar told us, there is an overcompensation of not having any woman physically and materially benefiting from the system, but kind of like getting through the night by giving the knowledge a female figure.
It's always like the woman is the muse, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Women is not the executor, but the
Yeah.
inspiration towards doing big things and cool things and all of that. So
I don't know, maybe this is empowering for some people, but I don't see that this is condescending. Like, please don't call women goddesses. Let's go beyond that.
Or it doesn't serve a purpose in the real life. I mean,
Yeah.
So that also reminds me of the conversation that you had with Aditi Sende, where she talks of how people stay in groups and it is inevitable that they like the work of other people like them. So how do you think about it?
Yeah.
Do you think there is, how real is this phenomena? And then if that is true, then how do we even break away from our silos and are able to look beyond and recognize excellence in people who do not look and work like us?
Right. I think this was Saman, Habib, and not Aditi from the book, who talked about like staying, like groups of people staying together.
So Saman and Amit, for example, Saman said that she and Amit, they would see that people would segregate. So that's a good point that you bring, which also means that in an institute which is reasonably well resourced, where Saman works, that she saw that people do segregate based on gender, which automatically paves the way for who becomes friends with whom more. And then one of those clusters of friendships have more power because historically they have more power. And if we find it difficult to still build bridges within an institute, then it must be incredibly difficult for the community.
Yeah, I bang on. I think this is the experience of a lot of the PhD students we spoke to. Because like when you're new and fresh, you don't know so much. There is this big loaded word in the science community we share, which is the imposter syndrome, right? So you will kind of be more comfortable, especially if it's an insecure space and not an open space and not a forgiving space that demands a lot out of you, where you have to make pretenses that you're very hardworking and you're the best genius ever. You will kind of stick to your kind because that's comforting, because then you can share. And I think this is very important, especially when we talk about caste-based marginalization. We see also a lot of isolation is very profound. Isolation has been talked about, written about in this academic spaces by people from the so-called lower caste, because they are not feeling like they're part of it. And in that case, this is also might be the reason behind a high number of suicides that we see um, in the queer as well as the lower caste communities, that we hear about in the media now and then. And when I talk to like some students, when I have lectures and stuff, and people tell me about these imposter syndrome, I always advise, like, find your kind. These are systemic issues, and you must find other people who are going through the same thing. It's the same thing with, feminist solidarity. When you see the other feminists around you, you want to share those experiences, right? There's the sisterhood. Especially in an oppressive system, these groupisms become more prominent because it's an insecure system. And science is definitely one of these, even though it wants to be a very open thinking, philosophical system. And the way out of it is for those who are at top positions, who have the power to kind of dictate what kind of culture goes on in the labs, to make all the effort that they can to make it a friendly system. Think always about the one who is feeling the most uncomfortable, who could be feeling the most uncomfortable. As women, a lot of us are familiar with this like hesitation that we feel when we want to have the right answer in the classroom, but we don't want to say it because we are not sure how it will be received because of the identity, how people look at me already. Right. So I think this is not the important thing. Is because I have written about marginalization, I will say from that perspective, it's very important to find your people, but to remove the need for this, the onus is on the institutions, on the lab leaders, to make a culture which is more open and forgiving and friendly, where different people who you don't know about, who are kind of, you don't share these experiences to, especially make and lean into that solidarity to remove the need for such groupism.
And that also, I mean, given that you talk about the unique challenges that women have and which men might even find difficult to connect with. And sometimes I also feel that not all women, including myself, might be always in a position to understand each other's challenges. And that's why Husnara's story in your book, I think, will really stay with me. Like Husnara, who's working at a technical position in a lab in Darjeeling, and the way that story comes out, I mean, I think that's going to stay with me because it challenges of how I have for a very long time thought about equality for men and women, and maybe there's some part of it that still, I mean, does come into play in my psyche and in my behavior. And maybe for that sake, I would also like you to read through Husnara's story and how it has also challenged your and Nandita's views on feminism.
Yes, of course, I would be happy to read.
And after that, I also know that Kinnera is waiting for asking questions from the audience. So after this reading, we'll move to Kinnera.
Sure. So just a short intro of the section I'm about to read. It's just one page. And it is in the intro of the book. And this part really talks about why we started this journey and the challenges that we faced. Also, there was like a growing up that we had to do when we started the project. And this kind of, Husnara helped us through this. And that's what Somdatta was referring to. The full story is a bit longer, which I encourage the readers to grab a copy to read, but here goes. The fourth individual in the room was Aman, Husnara's 4-year-old son. He insisted repeatedly for cartoon videos on YouTube on Natasha's office computer. This is where some prickly naivety on our part was about to be lifted. As science communicators, we were looking for empowering stories of science featuring women. That could have been the depth of our motivations when the project began. And here was one in front of us, a scientific laboratory with scientific women. The double burden that many women in science carry, or triple burden as it has been called academically, had dragged itself into the lab uninvited. Meeting Aman, a child dependent on his mother in a scientific space, was for us at first irksome. What's a child doing here? Doesn't he get in the way of all the science? In contrast, Natasha and Husnara heard his demands patiently and complied. Clearly, Natasha greatly admired Husnara's skillful management of the triple burden. Just for context, Husnara is the technician at Natasha's lab. So Natasha is the scientist here, and Husnara is also a scientific woman, but helping the labs out. Husnara's skillful management of the triple burden was greatly admired by Natasha. She looked up to Husnara in every way. So where was our own indignation coming from? After some self-reflection, humility, observation, reading, and numerous interviews with some incredible women, we came to adopt the feminist lens through which one needs to look at the realities of Indian women in science. We had to share our self-congratulatory view of young independent females and negotiate our entitled position of freedom to travel anywhere unhindered, devoid of realities like family and children. Meeting Indian women in science brought us face to face with all that we had taken for granted for many years, talents acquired as caste and class privileged city-bred women. Before the lab hopping journey actually took place and the reporting began, our view of feminism had been colored by our privileges. It took us a while for us to realize that our small wins against the patriarchy, like managing to stay out all night, were incomparable to Husnara's triumph in bringing her son to work. Our struggles had been very different from the struggles of so many women trying to keep their jobs, getting hired in the first place, or fighting to remove a sexual predator from their surroundings. Husnara, Aman, Natasha, and some other early interviews opened the door for us, the door into the ground realities of Indian women in science, where we found stories of success and struggle. The door was opened and in we went.
Thank you so much, Aashima. I hope that this conversation also, the conversation and the story, both help our audience also think more around how much do we even understand the women around us in our workplaces and particularly in these STEM spaces. With that, I'll hand over the mic to Kinera.
Thank you. That was an interesting conversation. There have been a couple of questions here. In fact, 2 questioners, but many questions. So that's an interesting thing. Somdatta, you don't have to go offline. You can be online. There is Kavyashree Rao from English and Foreign Language University. Her first question is, could you shed light on whether educated women of colonial India were active in scientific exploration in any way, even post-independence?
Aashima, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, they were active, although they were quite even less than they are today. So very few in numbers. There are great many books that have been written about them. I can recommend Neelam Kumar's Reader on Women in Science. And that talks about a lot of the chapters in that reader talk about the pre-colonial struggle to bring women in science into higher education. There is a part of our book called Legendary Women in Science that kind of go into this a little bit. Of course, we've all heard of Anamani, and we've heard of Aashima Chatterjee, and if you don't know these, they are not hard to find on the Indian media. And I can say that the woman's first entry into science and higher education coincides with women's entry into science and higher education anywhere. So Indian women entered universities at the same time, around the end of the 1800s. And a lot of also the Woman in Top chapter, the second chapter of the book, or is it the third, also talks about CMC, which is the Christian Medical College. And before we get into Gagandeep Kang's perspectives, we're also talking about this, how in the beginning of this women in science story in India are medical women. And this came out not for, I think, as is written in Neelam Kumar's Reader, this wasn't an act of like great generosity, but out of need, because of our caste system and our gender issues, biases. When women were getting sick, there wasn't a lot of options and medics to take care of them. And hence the Raj was the hand of the Raj was kind of twisted into educating women so that there could be women medics. And a lot of missionaries, Christian missionaries, are part of that story. And there is some inspired stuff in the book that I would recommend you to read. I can also suggest books, but please do contact me separately for that.
Yeah. Then we have a question from Sattuvalli Mohan Raj. I mean, this is something we did talk about. I wish the talk focused on success stories rather than systemic drawbacks. There are quite a few successful scientists, and the recent group from ISRO is a shining example. Now, will this obscure the actual problems? Especially because Bollywood has taken it on very big, and then does it mean that this will be thrown in the face? I mean, this is my question, in addition to what, a counter to what he's asking. Will it be counterproductive to other women scientists?
It depends how you look at it. Like Somdatta, you could also maybe weigh in if you want. But I don't think I talk so much about, I mean, these are also successes. Like if you are from a dominant group, maybe you don't realize that these are like actually giant successes for marginalized people to thrive and survive. But of course, the heroines of the book are definitely make their presence felt. Like I read out, these are stories of success and struggle, which are for a lot of us two sides of the same coin. And there are many heroines that are profiled in the book. If you would like to read only about the accomplishments, there is a different book that we wrote, me and Nandita, a couple of years ago, which is a children's book. It's an illustrated book, which is called 31 Fantastic Adventures in Science, also published by Penguin India, and you can get to know them. And like we made it a point, really, if you go to the lifeofscience.com, we made it a point to talk about firstly the scientific questions of these women. This is what we were after. Like I read out, as we went ahead in our journey as science communicators, did we realize that, oh, there is one problem here? And I think it's an important one. And to only look at the science would be kind of to, just be like this positive news. And I don't want to be that. I think it's also positive to imagine a different an equitable future, that we are kind of, actually this is Nandita's idea, and she always says that why are you being called negative when actually we are the ones who are positive, because we are imagining a much positive future.
Right. I think I completely concur with you on that, where I feel that because we do not even understand this huge demography, and our view of success in science is colored only by a certain small population. I mean, I think this conversation itself is that trigger for us to retrospect and introspect. If we understand everybody who's working in science and what does success mean for each one of them, and maybe for some of them I mean, the definitions are probably all very individualistic and they're very different from each other.
Okay. Kavishri asked another question. Ma'am, do you think pop culture via biopics, comics can help in making the next gen aware about female contribution to STEM evolution?
Yes. Yes, big ups to pop culture to take up the banner of awesome thinking, calculating, analyzing scientific women, because we need more of that. We're kind of starved of these kind of characters and protagonists in our literature, comics, and movies. I must also talk about this picture that we're all thinking about, this Mangalyaan picture, the ISRO colorful bindi silk sari wearing. This was, as we describe in the book, a woman on top moment, right? For us, it was, but I think it's also a woman on top moment because it is unexpected image. ISRO is such a scientific, techie space, and here we are seeing colorful silk sari, bindi, gajra wearing woman. We all celebrated that. And this picture has waves as it travels through time, because now we're already at Chandrayaan and we're still talking about that Mangalyaan image. But you also have to look at it a little bit deeply. Sorry to be like talking about the systemic stuff again, but the way we are talking about this image is also a little bit telling of how we think about women and scientists. We always make it a point to mention what they're wearing and how they're dressed and the colors and the flowers and the bindis and the puttus and all of this. Why do we do this? And we can't, like, when we discuss popular women scientists in our popular culture, that also we drag with it this other stuff. We need to explain that this is a woman who is Gharelu, who is Indian. In so many media articles, you will find, profiles of ISRO women and mention of that they also run households. Like, why is that important? Why do we not talk about, like, C.V. Raman's household or CNR Rao's household when we talk about them, or the Nobel Prize winners household? Why do we only, when talking about women scientists, do we also have to drag along the other stuff with it?
Yeah. Kavishri has another question. Have any of your interviewees spoken about mansplaining done to them despite their remarkable knowledge levels?
Yes, this is part of the reality of most women, but I think women scientists face this a lot more because they are in this space of knowledge and teaching and all of that. And often we heard anecdotes of women telling us that, people said, oh, I read the paper of Dr. So-and-so and I'm very impressed. And they work at your institute. And then when, similar incidents. And then the woman said, oh, I said, that is my paper. I'm Dr. So-and-so. And they're like, no, this person was. So there is kind of like disbelief. And there's also conferences that I have myself attended where, we also write about this in the book, while defending their scientific work. There's often instances that we witnessed where the men jury or the conveners kind of take over the conversation and kind of discuss among themselves, while the point of it that the woman scientist was making is lost. So this very commonly happens, and it happens in a very unconscious way. It is not really addressed, even though none of the women scientists can look past it. It's a big insult. And I think it is also not just women scientists, but their colleagues and allies have to kind of be better bystanders and say, please, don't do that, or talk about things in a more respectful way.
Her final question is, as a media student, I'd like to know what the media can do to change public perception, especially now when everyone has a voice via social media.
Hmm. That's a really good question. And I also wonder what to do, because I personally feel that our societies are not yet ready for the kind of media storm that we are inside currently. But what I have learned I can share is to always do fact checks, walk the extra mile to find sources that don't are not the first ones you think of, to make inclusivity one important part of your content production and your research. And I think it is a little bit more work, but it is important work, because otherwise we just get more of the same.
Yeah. Satyavali Mohan Raj says, mine was not a question actually, but thanks for taking it up. And he accepts your response. Dr. C.V. Mohan says, I have interacted and worked with quite a few ladies in the field of scientific research and physics. Those who enrolled with me for PhD completed the PhD, never sensed an issue. This was at IITM, he says.
Yeah, of course, there is not just one reality. And so the whole point of the book is also that there is not one answer to this gender gap question, because women have various identities and come from various backgrounds. And a lot of the women have told us that they don't have many issues. But of course, I would agree with you even more if I was hearing directly from the students, because PI tend to have also, an assumption, many assumptions. And when we talk to the students versus PI, we get different responses. And these are not, I have to say, it's not one person's fault, but these are, as I have been saying, invisible systemic issues that kind of keep on repeating. If you don't have a gender problem, we can go a little bit step further and also think about how to make our spaces more gender queer inclusive, or queer LGBTQ inclusive, or inclusive of the lower caste, so-called lower caste marginalized people. How do we treat our people who help out in the labs, who clean the labs, who prepare that the labs are ready to be worked on? There's always something one can do, because currently we are suffering from a with very low inclusion and diversity.
Yeah. So he further adds that they continue to be in research activity and published papers. But then I think, Aashima, you have already talked about the difference between more women scientists visible in universities and institutions rather than in labs, where there is an inversely proportional gender gap with relation to power centers and financial resources. So I think you did make that distinction. Kavya, of course, thanks you for the elaborate and insightful responses. I'm very happy that this session focused not on the negative part, but for the improvements that need to be made. The most important thing you talked about is that the low gender parity in STEM in India as compared to other countries is rather low. I think that is a very significant point, and I think that has to focus on women in science in India, and a lot more opportunities have to be made out and supported. You also mentioned the very important point that diversity benefits science, and therefore systemic changes increase participation and visibility. These are the bigger takeaways from this session, rather than talk about the limited purview of women struggling in science. I think that's how I look at this particular session. You have raised the larger issues which are very important to be addressed by Indian policymakers and institutions in order to increase the gender gap disparity in India. I think that's a very positive note on which we are ending. Thank you very much for a very nice conversation, which brought out these issues so clearly. Thank you very much, Somdatta, for carrying on this conversation. And I would like to thank Aashima and Nandita in absentia for this lovely book that you have brought out. And I hope that there'll be more such books coming in future too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kinnara, and the HLF team for allowing Sci City Hyderabad to its first session with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for collaborating with us. And we wish your organization all the very best in future.
Thank you.
And before we sign off, I'd like to remind our viewers about the in-person session next Saturday, Meet the Filmmaker, Life Flows On, a film in which the late Tom Alter is starring. It's a wonderful film, and this will be screened at Shiva Theatre, Annapurna Studios at Banjara Hills, in association with Geta Zentrum, Annapurna College of Film and Media, and the Hyderabad Literary Festival. See you there. And once again, thank you, Somdatta and Aashima, for this, and Nandita in absentia.
Thank you. Thanks, Somdatta, for your nice questions. Thank you, Kinnara. Thanks, the audience, also for engaging. It was really nice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aashima. Bye.
Bye.